Hi, my name is Jeff Ireland. I'm a year one MLTI ambassador. This is my 28th year in education, and I'm proud to say that I've spent all of that time in RSU 4. During that time, I've had many roles, including 9 years as both an assistant principal and a principal.
And I'm Jonathan Werner. I am an employee of the Maine DOE, but like Jeff, I was previously an MLTI ambassador. Before that, I was the tech integrator for Cape Elizabeth Middle School and came to this work, as we'll talk more about, as I began to realize that there were some ways we could rethink professional development and have now found my career in working on professional development, which I'm enjoying enormously.
I think it's important to note that neither Jonathan nor I consider ourselves experts, but rather we came across this text, this resource, and thought it would be great to share with those of you in the field who are doing this work. So these are the 4 outcomes we're going to be looking to achieve today. Looking to gain some perspective on selecting content that best meets your audience's needs. We're going to look at some tips for creating engaging workshops and better understand the impact of tips and strategies for facilitation. And then we'll leave you with some resources as well. Also important to note that the asynchronous style of this session you may find in conflict with some of the strategies and tips that we talk about. It's an unfortunate part of having to deliver PD this way, but it's important to note kind of right up front. So you'll see that the session will be broken up into different sections. The first part, the framework, we're going to be talking about andragogy versus pedagogy and how our sessions for adult learners might be different than with students. We'll introduce the workshop survival guide, which is the text with which we draw a lot of our content. In the developing content section, we're going to cover topics like the audience profile, workshop scheduling, and developing outcomes. Then under design considerations, we'll examine developing a workshop skeleton, different teaching formats, and also slide development. Then we'll consider tips and strategies for more effective facilitation in the beyond content section, and then we'll round things out with some more resources. So now let's chat about the idea of andragogy and how it relates better to the concept of pedagogy. I think it's important to note that there is a difference between teaching children and teaching adults, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. There is, so we've all heard of pedagogy. It's the science behind how we teach children and then our strategies and how we develop lessons. And it's important to note that when we teach children, oftentimes the children have less experience, life experience that they bring to the classroom. And so we don't have that necessarily to draw upon. But when we talk about andragogy, which is the method and practice of teaching adult learners, that adult learners come with a lot more life experience and therefore learn from more experiential learning techniques. So here's a graphic organizer that shows the 6 principles of adult learning. Adults have more internal motivation. They tend to need to know why they have to learn something. They like focusing learning on problems and draw greatly upon prior experiences. Their learning readiness is linked to social roles and are often more self-directed and responsible for their learning. So when we look at the concept of self-concept principle, how they are far more responsible and self-directed, we are able to, when we work with adults, give them way more input into setting their own goals and helping to develop the tasks that help them meet those goals. So a real life example of that might be a colleague of mine and Jonathan's named Nicole. We do quite a few AI presentations together, and we're very thoughtful to say right up front to our audience that that we recognize that they're going to see things that interest them, and if they want to just go off and explore those and kind of be divergent from where we are, then we say please do that. That's their need, and they want to set that task for themselves, and we encourage that. So in terms of similarities and differences between pedagogy and andragogy, you'll notice that they are similar in that most all learners want to know why they are learning something, and adults are often able to determine their own roles and tasks. Um, but the difference is the adults have, as mentioned before, way more experiences from which to draw for their learning.
I think one of the things I was surprised by here is that so much of adult learning seems to forget the similarities between pedagogy and I say pedagogy and andragogy. I don't really know why, but I do. That one of the reasons that I came into this work was I went to so much professional development that ignored the students as learners. And in the example that I frequently give when I talk about this, I went to 3 8-hour days of lectures on differentiation. And it struck me that there was probably no greater irony of professional development than being lectured to about the importance of differentiation. So, as Jeff said, we'll try to model as much as we can in this presentation what we're talking about with the limitations you mentioned of it being asynchronous. But holding in mind that you're teaching adults who were once students can be a really helpful framework from my perspective, and one that allows you to really approach it as requiring the attention that you would give it as a teacher, and not just assume that because they're grown up, you might have their compliance, but you don't necessarily and probably don't have their full attention or the kind of impact that you want to have on them if you are simply delivering the content without attention to your methodology.
Yeah, I think we've all sat in those workshops before where we would never do this to our children. So this is the text that we engaged in a book study earlier on in the year, called the Workshop Survival Guide, How to Design and Teach Workshops That Work Every Time. It struck quite a few of us as we did this, and I know as we read the book, and I know that as I look back on my history of developing professional development, I wish I had known the contents of this book many years ago. But I was struck by this quote about mastering a craft. Basically, it takes time. You gotta keep at it, but that you gotta forgive yourself for when it doesn't work, and just keep plugging away. And I've had to do that for myself as well. So we're going to talk first about how to design your workshop, and then we're certainly going to move on to then tips and strategies on how to facilitate those workshops. So so when we are going through this slide deck, it'll be important to note that from this point on, if you're seeing a blue slide like the one in front of you, it'll be speaking to content that comes from that text and specific tips and strategies in that with that blue background. And then when you see this slide, which will always follow a blue slide with that kind of off-white background, it's us trying to share real life examples from our work to kind of amplify the text. And what we've tried to do is create a kind of a theme or a thread throughout these examples of some of the professional development that we've designed for around AI and delivered over the course of the year. So we've used real life examples. And also to remind folks that are watching this that this is not live, and if you need to pause and move on, or you need to use the restroom or take care of anything, please feel free to do that. So in this section, we're going to examine developing audience profile, a workshop schedule, and taking a look at those learning outcomes as you design your professional development. So early in the process of designing your workshop, you want to consider gaining as much information as you can about your audience. Can you get answers from the people that are designing or organizing that workshop. And, definitely want to consider, is this a virtual or is this an in-person audience that can have a big effect on your design? Can you predict any objections or concerns that might be, or skepticism, as we like to say, that might be present in your audience? And can you prepare yourself for that? Is the audience going to be, are they self-selecting to be there, or are they being asked to be there by those that supervise them? And how you design some of your workshop skeletons and breaks, et cetera, can be affected by that. So a real life example, a colleague of mine, Nicole, who's a fellow ambassador, and she and I do these AI presentations together. We did a presentation that ended up being in a very, very large auditorium with over 150 teachers. They were required to be there, and it was about a topic that some of them had some real concerns or skepticism about. And so we took that in consideration and had kind of formulated some questions ahead of time that we thought might be asked or challenged upon, and we had responses ready for those. And it's really important, I think, to also, if you can, to meet with the organizers of the event to kind of get some of those pieces of information before you actually get in front of your audience. So in terms of developing your schedule, it's probably not thought of as a highly important part of workshop design, but it really can make or break how your event goes. So establishing a firm start and end time is important. Making sure you don't have chunks of content being delivered in too long of a stretch without giving people breaks. You want to have coffee, food, water, things like that available can really either lighten the mood or just kind of ease things for your staff or for your audience. And making sure that the number of breaks and how long they are kind of can break things up in an intentional way and give people a motor break, or if not done properly, can kind of disrupt your flow. So something to consider. So a little tip, especially if you are working with people who are asked to be there, they're not self-selected, is don't go long. Stay within that time frame, and whatever it is that you need to do to adjust in the moment, do that so that people are getting out on time. It might be a little different if they're self-selecting and they're really trying to absorb as much as they can. But here's an example of our schedule that we used in one of our AI workshops. You can see it was an hour and a half long, and we have a break, 10 minutes there. And so that none of our sessions or segments really ran more than 45 minutes. And then we had a Q&A session at the end, which also gives you a little bit of a cushion. So if you're running long on some of your more important content, you can absorb a little bit of that with your Q&A session or eliminating the Q&A session. And this may be developing outcomes and takeaways may be probably the most important of the workshop design strategies, as these are the outcomes that you're really hoping to get. And you think about outcomes as kind of the difference between what people know when they arrive at your workshop and what they know when they leave your workshop. They should be really crisp and clear, so when somebody comes to you or is deciding whether they want to come, if they have that choice, they have a real idea about what they're going to get and not be confused or have it be vague as to what the outcomes will be or what they'll be getting from your workshop. And then each of those outcomes needs to have carefully selected activities that are going to support directly the acquisition of those outcomes. So here's just an example of an unclear outcome when we were developing our AI session. We will learn about AI, which is true, but AI is such a massive concept that learning about it really isn't all that specific. But yet we want to make sure people know that when they come to our session, they're going to learn about AI tools that will save them time as educators. That's far clearer in terms of an outcome.
So as you were talking, Jeff, it occurred to me that there might be an analogy here to when you call the electrician and you have a problem, you know what it is, you have a good idea of it, and you are hoping that the electrician will bring the right tools and the right frame of mind, show up on time, do the work you hired them for. We as the electricians coming in don't have a lot of that context, but we can do some work to figure out what it is. And then we can also be sensitive to the fact that if there's a tree through their roof, we as the electrician are not necessarily their biggest need at the moment. So whatever we can bring to bear may help them, but they might have a generator going. And so there's something that's assisting their current situation that you may be able to augment, but really thinking sensitively about the universe into which you're being dropped and the tools you're bringing to work on that problem. As I think about this electrician analogy, I think you potentially buy yourself a lot of goodwill by making the emergency house call, figuring out what the need is in this moment, and then later on coming back with the thing that you'd really like to share, the piece that feels really important to you, may have a lot better audience when you come back with that second visit. Remaining sensitive to the fact that you may also, as Jeff gave you the example in AI, be encountering things that have nothing to do with you. And that is really important to remember, something we'll talk more about in a moment, but that there are a lot of dynamics at play that, especially for that audience that is being voluntold to be there, you just need to say, that is not about me. Nicole shared the story of someone who sat in the front row of her presentation like this. And she just literally had to look over her and say, like, all right, I can tell that this is not your cup of tea, and I'm not going to change that in the course of this 45 minutes. So on we go. And it's easy to forget, I think, when you're up there. But remember how we said they're like students? We've all had that student, right? So there they are, growing up in your front row.
And I think that, back to the developing the audience profile, that if you can talk ahead of time to somebody who's organizing this, you may be able to get some insight into those things that are going to affect your presentation, your session. May not have anything to do with your session, but if you have that background, that may be very helpful to you in your design or in your facilitation.
Yeah. So we're going to shift now from sort of that universe into which you're dropped to things that are more within your control and how you might respond to the situation that you're is being defined for you. And one of the things we like to look at that we pulled from this book, and we've both been using quite a bit, is thinking about the learning outcomes and the supporting topics as your framework for the content. Then as Jeff said, really honoring those scheduled breaks and recognizing that they are necessary to keep people focused. We'll talk also about how to intersperse something in addition to breaks that can help with that engagement. But your workshop skeleton is really built around those pieces. So as you look at this particular example, again, from Jeff and Nicole's work, the learning outcomes on the left there, AI tools are going to save you time, managing the overwhelm of AI guidance for classrooms, and accessing AI resources. They want everyone to leave with that sense of accessibility. And the presentation is called From Fear to Inspiration, I think very rightly so, given the current climate where we are. And those learning outcomes then work really nicely in a framework that takes two of them, gives a break and described here as playtime, meaning the chance for them to explore on their own. Second two learning outcomes, same thing. And then the digital dash, which describes kind of a really quick tour of a bunch of different things that launches those attendees back into their work with a toolkit. And I love that concept, that the framework really looks to accomplish both the learning outcomes, recognize the needs of the people that are there, and really give some formats that are conducive to hearing the message and to really seeing the potential transformation that AI can provide. Going back to my point a moment ago, if people leave as worried or as hostile towards AI as they were when you arrived, you haven't failed. You have encountered something that was beyond your control. And that framework for me has been really helpful, especially around the idea of not taking it personally. Clearly, there may be ways in which I can retool my presentation. I can rethink how I'm offering it. But on its face, those individuals that leave where they started don't indicate a mass failure. They indicate that there was room for growth on your part. And as Jeff said, really giving yourself some grace around that idea that I had this experience teaching ELL families for the first time and really left feeling terrible about what I'd done. But as I thought more about it, I thought, you know what? I did much better than I would have if I'd not been as well prepared as I was. And I learned a ton from my next opportunity. And a number of those families offered the feedback that it was really helpful. So that is a great metric for me, a chance for me to grow, but a chance to have also brought something to them that hopefully was helpful. Looking at this idea of the formats, or sort of the ways that we think about how we spend our time, one of the things that can be really powerful is using a 20-minute guideline. That is not even within that 60 minutes that doesn't have a break, not sticking with a single method of instruction for more than 20 minutes. And here's where this is really similar to classroom teaching. You know that you're not going to keep kids engaged most of the time in something that goes on and on in the same format. So applying that principle might look like having small groups and paired discussions that support the lecture topic, or giving them a chance to try out, as the last framework did, some of the tools that you've been teaching. So they're internalizing that before they've left. That Q&A piece too depends on your comfort level, but I will frequently open the floor whenever someone has a question. I feel comfortable doing that. Not everyone does, but reserving some time before just the end where questions are welcome can be really powerful. And those small groups give people a chance to ask questions in a smaller format where they're not having to raise their hand in front of the entire group, but instead say, hey, Bob, I'm wondering if this made sense to you or if you could help me out with it. Picking the person they're comfortable with and not taking the same level of risk, I guess I would say, in a larger group. When we look at that on the ground, that might look like some lecture, but as we said, some small group and pair discussions can augment that. The try it now piece, a scenario challenge I really like too, where you're given a fact pattern and asked to apply something you've learned or think through how you might apply something you've learned. And taken from the book, I loved that Jeff selected this concept. The author talks about how difficult it is to learn yoga through lecture. And as a metaphor, that's so fantastic, right? So many things where please, fold your hands in your lap and learn together about engaging teaching and learning is not likely to be as successful as it might otherwise be, given a chance to think more about it. One of the former ambassadors, Kate Meyer, and I do a session about design thinking, and it would be ridiculous for us to lecture to the group about it. So we give opportunities for design thinking to take place during the workshop, and we found it's incredibly effective, and people report back that they're much more likely to use the content because they've had a chance to try it out, and they recognize that we're honoring the value of it right there in the moment. And that has really stuck with us, that it is a decision on our part, but one that is really successful in making sure people leave with the learning outcomes that we have designed.
I think also, not only is it important to match these teaching formats with your learning outcomes, so selecting a teaching format that will best help the audience get to that learning outcome, but I think mixing it up not only helps to keep their attention, but also different audience members are going to relate better to different, they're going to learn differently or learn better, varying depending on what the teaching format is. So if you can include a variety of those, you're going to hopefully touch upon the strengths of all the audience members by including different formats.
Another piece of the puzzle here that I think both Jeff and I were surprised by was how late in the game the author suggests that we create our slides. And whether or not you do it exactly this way, remembering that what you're putting into the slides is much more important than the slides themselves, I think is a great framework. So doing as much preparation as you can, maybe not all of it as the author suggests, but working from a really solid, what we're calling the skeleton there, the framework that your slides are going to bring to life. And then keeping that work as close as you can to visuals and content that represents the learning outcomes and builds on the learning outcomes. Certainly there's some space for pieces that augment it or things that are slightly off your main course, but keeping most of your food on the plate of your learning outcome is really serving your audience really much better than being too diffuse in what you're presenting. Thinking about how your design matches your purpose. In this case, we drew our design cue from the book itself, our color scheme from that. We liked it. We thought it worked really well. And we hope you do too. But it made more sense for us to really think through something that was addressing adults and a visual that was as clean as we could make it, given the fact that you're hopefully going to use this as a kind of textbook later on, use these slides as a textbook. And to that end, we'll offer at the end of this a whole series of resource slides that we hope are helpful, which connect some of the concepts you've already seen and offer some new expanded comments as well, content that we didn't think made sense to try to share in this shorter period of time, but which really did make sense to give you as a piece of the package as you're thinking through how you want to approach the work of designing your next presentation or your next professional development. What does that look like on the ground? In the case of the AI presentation, Nicole and Jeff include this whole series of links to teacher tools. And each of those is a clickable link taking you directly to the resource that they've talked about. So this small chart summarizes the majority of what they've introduced, the tools that they're hoping you'll walk away using some of, and being able to pull those directly from the slide deck that you've shared at the beginning really gives you some narrow focus, I guess I would say. You're not leaving them to go back and Google everything you talked about, but you're giving them direct access to the things that you think are the most important. I'll say too that one of my big discoveries is that the work of curation as someone providing PD is critical, that helping people sort through the enormous mass of options that are out there, even though you feel like you may be getting rid of things that would be good to talk about, deciding for sure, as you see in this series of choices, this dozen options represents some tiny corner of the AI universe available to support teachers. But it is the group that Jeff and Nicole have agreed jointly are the ones that give the most, I'll say, bang for the buck. And this simple choice to put them all in one place is an enormous service to the people who have attended the workshop.
So now we're going to talk about facilitating your professional development session. So here are a couple of things to consider as you are facilitating. And again, some of these will tap into the design part as well. But a little bit of a knowledge goes a long way in understanding your audience and whatnot. Consider the devices that you'll be using that can impact do what you're asking them to do, and the tools and or resources play nicely with the devices that they have. Some do and some don't. Are there going to be drinks or snacks being provided by the organizer? That will matter in your facilitation. The level of expertise that your audience has will have an impact on how you facilitate. Whether you want to stay longer or go deeper may depend on where your audience is with their own skill levels. What are the expectations of the organizers that have asked you to come present? Do they have specific outcomes they are looking for? And that may affect your facilitation as well. How long of a time you have and or short of a time you have will definitely affect how you facilitate. Or do you need to push through some material to get to cover everything, or can you go deeper with your content? And of course, as I mentioned before, the location has, and this was a learning for me, where the setup of where you are presenting has an impact on how you facilitate it. If you are, as I mentioned, in an auditorium and you've designed you're going to facilitate activities that require small group work and getting up and moving around and regrouping and whatnot, that's not going to work well with an auditorium. But if you know that ahead of time, that will definitely help your facilitation. So introducing yourself sounds simple, sounds kind of silly to even talk about, but it's really how we start our interaction with our audience. And we can start well or we can flounder. So it's important to think about how it is that you do that. You are beginning with a layer of credibility. The author talks about how the fact that you are just there to present on a topic, you instantly have some level of credibility. So how can you use that and not flounder with it? You want to contextualize who you are. So making sure that people understand that you're there for a reason, that you're the one to present the topic. So there must be something you know. So trying to share with the staff, with the audience, what it is that causes you to be there. Giving a quick overview of the slideshow. Pictures and Bitmojis are always a good way to kind of humanize the content if it's perhaps dry. And consider how much time do you really want to take to introduce yourself. So here's an example, and this is what you heard me, or how you heard me introduce myself at the beginning of this presentation, and it was purposeful. So a rule of thought is to make sure you have your name up there, and then one or two, and here's the trick, relevant details. So I selected the two details of sharing my longevity in RSU4 and that that 9 years of that was spent as an administrator. And I selected those purposefully to help the audience know that, okay, maybe this guy has enough experience that he has delivered some professional development and has some varied experiences to present, maybe something to share. And that also thinking that perhaps a good percentage of those of you who are listening to this deliver professional development. Therefore, you may be in leadership at some level, and that maybe mentioning that my experience in that area may help with a little credibility to deliver the content. So there are 4 types of co-teachers or guest speakers. If you either choose or are going to work as Jonathan and I are together with somebody as opposed to working individually, there are definitely pros and cons to that. Jonathan, you want to speak to that?
I think I barged my way into today's presentation because the genesis was this book group that we had, and this remains really vital to our work as people who offer professional development, really keeping ourselves as a team focused on these questions. But I also shared with Jeff that when I was originally developing asynchronous content, as I mentioned at the beginning of my work as an ambassador, really sort of randomly, Kate and I decided, hey, let's try one of these sessions together. And the difference was so palpable and so significant in terms of the accessibility, the dynamics, the interest, and hoping today that we're demonstrating that as well, that something in the conversation, the shared perspective really does amplify the messages and offer some kind of observations about areas of commonality that I joke when people say, like, I think I'm repeating something someone else said, but to me that only emphasizes the fact that that is particularly important, and hearing it again is actually a service. As you think about sort of how you want to structure this with that partnership, as you'll see, there are 4 kind of ways to do it. Thinking about the full co-teacher, which Jeff will talk about in a second, is the way he and Nicole have taught. The idea of an expert guest, an operational helper who is someone that's really just making sure that things are going as planned. And the example that we often give is during the pandemic, wouldn't it have been delightful to have an operational helper when you were trying to teach? because so much of your time was spent on these ridiculous things that have nothing to do with what you're actually trying to share with your students. And then finally, the facilitation helper, maybe also really helpful during the pandemic, where people are offering ways to let you know, hey, there's a question over here, or be able to, instead of requiring that someone ask a question out loud in front of a large group, they could just call over that facilitation helper who can respond and really just help them get on track. What page are we on here? Or, where's that website? I don't see it. Those simple questions can really derail an audience member, and then by extension, derail you. And someone whose role is to support that really can be very valuable.
And so we keep referring to Nicole and I. It's really a very interesting working relationship in that you are when you're truly co-presenting. There's one of the nice things about it is that it's an easier lift in that I have come to the conclusion that developing really good high quality professional development is time consuming, and it's difficult. It's rewarding but difficult work. And when you have somebody to share in that, you're not only is your product better, but the lift is a little bit lighter because you're sharing that. But a couple of things that Nicole and I have found work. If you're going to co-present, meet before. I know it seems silly, but before, we've done this presentation a lot, but we still meet before each time to make sure we're really clear who's going to attack which content, and we put our initials on each slide. If you could see my slides right now, you'd see Jonathan and I have done the same thing, just to make sure that we are smoother in our presentation. We reflect immediately afterwards, how did that go? Sometimes it's more formal or informal. But that we also, and you've heard Jonathan and I do this a couple of times throughout the presentation, is that we give each other permission to jump in, because I'm not necessarily going to remember everything, and or Jonathan may have an insight that is really valuable, and that the flow and the conversation is better when you each have that permission, or you've given each other that permission. So serving people in the room is an interesting concept. I think the term serve itself kind of sets a tone for, you're there not to espouse or to be the expert or feed your ego, but you're there with the sole purpose of benefiting your audience and helping them leave with something more than they came with. And I think it's important that you understand your audience. We've said that a number of times, to the best of your ability, so that you can meet their needs. And sometimes, in a workshop model, in a larger conference, you don't know who you're going to get. And some people may show up and not want to be there, or they don't know what they're coming to. You may expect a lot more and get a lot less, but I think the concept that the author talks about, which is the best people for your audience are the people that are in front of you. And so you give them 100% of your effort and your energy and make it the best audience, the best experience for whoever it is that's in front of you. So here's an example, again, using that AI thread, that we had, Nicole and I had showed up to a professional development. It was a group of middle school and high school ELA teachers to talk about AI. It was the Monday before vacation, and it was the day of the eclipse. So I forget what they released early, and the teachers were walking into the library, and it was immediately visible. These were tired folks. They were really exhausted from everything I just explained. And so our original plan was to have breakout sessions, if you will, where we would take and split the group, have them learn something different based on their needs, bring them back together, and do that multiple times. And Nicole and I immediately looked at each other and said, nope, we're going to keep everybody together, let them sit, let them relax and absorb at their rate. But we needed to make that adjustment to make their experience better. And the better prepared you are to do that, the more fluid and natural it looks. Like they didn't have any idea that we had made that adjustment.
I laughed to myself when you mentioned the people that are coming in to present clearly for themselves, and we've all been in that, right, where they're feeding their own ego or just so proud of what they do, and the converse of that I try to utilize as much as I can is what Jeff said at the beginning. We do not tout ourselves as experts here. We tout ourselves as experienced, but not with any kind of be all end all question. And one of the things I present on frequently is digital citizenship. And I say, I wish I had a magic elixir I could give you to make this problem go away, in terms of distraction and negative impacts on social emotional learning, but I cannot do that. So I'm not going to promise you that. And I say it at the outset in the context that Jeff described to people that are opting into your session at a larger conference. One of the things I try to make sure I remind myself to say at the beginning is I will not be offended if you stand up and leave. Your time is way too valuable. And if it turns out that as you hear me presenting, this is not what you imagined it would be, or you're determining that in this moment, it's not what you need, that is much more valuable than you trying to stay and stick it out. Go find the thing that will serve you the best. And what I found from that is people don't always avail themselves of it, but the message is I'm really doing my best to be relevant to you, and I'm hoping that you will bring to bear that interest and engage with the work we're doing because you are making that choice to be here. To that end, and sort of respecting the people in the room, we'll come back around to something we may have really harped on, but it is because we think it is so important. Do not ignore the clock. Going over time, it's disrespectful, and you will lose people as they anticipate eagerly the departure and wonder why you are clearly not far enough along in your presentation. That practice that Jeff talked about, so you know your correct pace. Something that one of our colleagues shared with us, Martha, who's another ambassador, was rather a self-evident reminder that just never occurred to me. A song has a specific length. And so if you have 3 songs that total 10 minutes and you play those 3 songs during work time, that will be a 10-minute work time. Again, not necessarily rocket science, but something that just didn't occur to me as a really nice way to set a tone and an environment, and then not really have to track the clock yourself as you're answering people's questions or working in small groups. The music ends and it's, musical chairs, and everyone sits down and you continue. That idea of the breaks for your participants is equally important for figuring out ways to cushion your time and keeping those really visible to yourself. If you've scheduled in a 10-minute break and you go 3 minutes over, now you may still give a 7-minute break, but you are staying on schedule with your content. The flip side being you give the full 10 minutes, but you have a minute then to reset and figure out which things you're going to include or get rid of because you're not quite where you hoped to be in your agenda. Keeping 2 clocks can be really valuable, and not doing that on your cell phone, so you just actually have some timer sitting there. And or we are using Canva right here. Canva has a tool built in where you just push a number 1 through 9 and a timer will pop up with that amount of time counting down. Most of the programs that are used for presentation have something similar, but giving the visual to yourself in multiple ways really is going to help you stay on track.
And so there's way more in this text and in the whole idea of developing quality PD than we could have covered in this conversation. So we've included some extra tips in an appendix at the end of this slideshow, some different quick tips about avoiding disaster and the whole concept of charisma in your interactions with the audience. So if this interests you, you can cruise along in the slide deck. You'll see the bit.ly and the QR code for this presentation and for the slideshow itself is right here. You'll see our emails, and we're very serious when we say we don't just put them up there for show. Our job is to help folks, educators in the field, and the more we have people reach out to us and tell us what they want, and then we can find the right people and put together stuff to help you guys out. So please take advantage of that. Reach out to us, whether it's about this particular conversation or it's about something else that you or your staff or your school needs, please do reach out. And thank you for your time.
We appreciate it. Have a great day.